chapters 10 and 11 in our book, I Rode a Horse of Milk White Jade. 10 is very short, and it's called You Are Chosen. I lay in my bed that night after dinner, eyes still open wide, heart banging. No one knew of my visit. And as I listened to the heavy rhythmic breathing of those sleeping around me, my father, Shura, and her two sons, sensible people who would readily laugh at Ekin Corlo's strange words, I began to think I was a little crazy for having walked alone into the black gear. The moon that night was fat and round. The winds had pulled aside the felt covering of our smoke hole, and through this opening poured the moon's brilliance. I watched through drooping eyes as this looping circle of light slipped slowly across my toes, crept up to my chest, rested upon my folded hands, illuminating the dirty half-moons of each fingernail, and finally laid its full brilliance upon my face. I closed my eyes to the glare. Sleep was just pulling its warm blanket over me when at my elbow I heard my name whispered, "Oh, Una." My heart leaped over a beat. I opened my eyes. There at the side of my bed knelt my grandmother, Ekin Corlo. Draped across one arm was Bader, purring contentedly. "Oh, Una," she whispered again. "Did you feel the circle of the moon upon your feet? You are chosen, and so you must choose." I could manage only to stammer, "What? Why do you come here now?" Following Ekin Corlo's gaze to the foot of my bed, I saw, slumping in the moonlight, an old leather pouch. "You will need assistance in the days ahead," she said quietly. I looked around, wondering why my grandmother's arrival had not wakened anyone else. I don't understand," I said. She kept her voice low, speaking so softly that I had to hold my breath to hear the words. "You want to run the race next year and win, to bring good luck? And so you may, my granddaughter, for the white mare has shared a talent with you." She leaned closer. "Never lose her." Her breath carried the words with a warm rush to my ear. I exhaled, excitement roaring in my head. Was my grandmother a shamanist telling me I would win the race next year? With that horse? I instantly wondered. But again, she was whispering, and I had to suck in my breath to listen. "Now your journey takes you south, where graze 10,000 white mares." "And one will be mine?" I whispered excitedly. "One will be my swift horse? How will I find her?" Ekin Corlo closed her eyes, clutched Bader to her chest, and rocked back and forth upon her knees. She spoke in a chanting voice. "On the mountains, cold breath, fly blackbirds, laying wings of gold at your feet. Fly with them, but follow only your heart." She opened her eyes and stared at me. I heard her rattly breathing, saw her thin lips flutter. Then, admonishing me to sharply listen, Ekin Corlo pressed her face to my ears and whispered for a long time about the many sicknesses and healings of horses. She described herbs and clays and where they could be found, which plants to eat and to avoid, the proper timing for fire and bloodletting. Confusion welled within me, but the urgency in her voice forced me to concentrate. When her learning had filled my ears, my grandmother sat back, silent, and simply stared at me again. After a moment, she spoke a few more words. "Oh, Una," she said softly, "I too have felt the pity of others, but always I choose my own path, and I pull my own luck from the air. Remember." Now, to tell truth, I cannot remember what happened after this. When next I awakened, the moonlight had left our gear, and I did not know in the darkness what was real and what was a dream. When I spoke again, the sky was just growing pale with the sun's light. Throwing aside the fleece covers, I rushed to look out the door flap. Ekin Corlo's gear was gone. Okay, and that was chapter 10. And so Una's grandmother has told her that she is chosen, but must choose to cling to her mare, to be ready for a journey, to make her luck good, plus practical advice on how to care for horses. So she gives her a bunch of information. And then we have chapter 11, The Mountain's Cold Breath. After Ekin Corlo's visit, the moment I opened my eyes each morning, my heart quickened. Is this the day, I wondered? Leaping from my bed, I raced into the coldness, searching the pink horizon, but I could see nothing coming. And the winds always whistled and danced around me, brushing first one cheek and then the other, lifting my braid from behind, and when I spun, shoving me with a gust almost to my knees. In the dark after bedtime, I pulled the old leather pouch, scratched with pictures of strange animals and stamped in brilliant colors, from its hiding place beneath my bed. Night after night, I fondled its few prizes, a large, curving fish hook with a line of sinew knotted to it, a short dagger, elegant in its jewel-encrusted handle, deadly in its pointed harness, a small iron cooking pot big enough for just one meal of mutton stew, a silver-mounted steel for sparking a fire, 3 long needles, and 1 small leather bag, stiff and discolored from much use. As my fingers traced the painted pattern, I wondered whom the pouch had belonged to and when I would begin my journey. Ekin Corlo had also left me a large packet of herbs, which she had told me to mix with hot water and apply every other day in a bandage tied around the injured leg of the white mare. On alternate days, I was to lead the mare into a deep, cold stream and let her stand while I counted to 500. But what about the earth spirits? I had asked, alarmed. To stand upon them as they traveled through the waters is to bring down upon my head the worst of bad luck. Ekin Corlo had only smiled. First, pray for the earth spirits' help in healing your mare, she said, and the earth spirits will know that you know their power. By asking them to help you with their power, you will not be harmed by them. And so, though winter blew its bitter fury across the steppes, I regularly sneaked away from the camp, leading the white mare, bowing and praying to the earth spirits, which I could hear gurgling within the ice-covered stream. I begged through chattering teeth that they use their power not to harm me, but to heal the leg of my white mare. Then I coaxed the mare onto the frozen surface, the weight of each hoof crashing through the ice and stirring the spirits into a bubbling frenzy. 1, 2, 3, I began counting, shivering, shifting my weight uneasily from foot to foot and staring at each little noise. I fully expected the gods to pretend not to hear my prayers and to lay me out flat and lifeless in the frozen mud. Day after wintry day, I treated the mare's leg. A hot, herb-filled bandage on one day, the cold waters of the stream the next. But after one moon had come and gone, the mare trotted only slightly more steadily, and I dared not climb upon her back still. Gradually, I stopped the treatments. The day was too cold, and I was too tired. And at night, I fell into bed, weary but not sleepy, leaving the leather pouch and its contents to gather dust beneath me. In the cold stiffness of that winter, I stopped chasing dreams. My father's gear felt very crowded now that his new wife, Shira, and their 2 sons, 8 and 12 years, lived with us. The future promised no better, for she was already full-bellied with my father's child. Shira doted on her 2 boys, never scolding them for tasks poorly done or even left unfinished. She tried to include me in her coddling. Placing her hands upon my waist, she would steer me onto a cushion the way one helps an old person with weak bones. Into my hand she would push the easiest of work, sewing or stirring, so as to not risk further injury to your poor foot, she moaned while my father smiled. My face flushed hot at these times, and not from sitting so close to the cooking fire. I know Shira fretted, and I know she didn't understand, but on more days than not, I fled our gear. I simply had to be with the horses. By winter's end, I had fastened a name upon the white mare, Bayan, rich with beauty and goodness, or rather she had fastened the name upon herself. I tried several other names, Galeute, for she could be awkward as a goose, and Buron, for she was as white as a blizzard. But at the speaking of each name, the mare had turned her head away from me. At the same time, the word Bayan kept popping into my head. Finally, I chuckled and said, Bayan, and the mare walked right up to me and shoved her soft muzzle against my neck. I threw my arms around her then, and felt that all was right in the world. Since the festival at Karakoram, I had rarely heard of Bayan, yet we daily spoke to each other through touch. Oh, I had rarely heard Bayan, hadn't heard her actually saying words, but we spoke through touch and an exchanging of warm breaths. In moving by her side as she grazed and listening, I had come to feel a kinship I had never before known. She was my friend. When my hands ran along her thinning neck, traveled across the gentle slope of her back, I knew in my heart that she was old and that I would never ride her. Perhaps this would be our last season together. All the more reason, I thought, to pass the days at her side, watching the clouds tumble across the sky or laughing at the chattering susliks popping out of and back into the ground. Those were those little rodents. Happily, I saw that the fading winter had not been too hard upon Bayan. As the sun shone longer and longer upon the steppes, I watched her move with much less stiffness. Twice, in truth, I saw her gallop out from the herd with barely a hitch in her stride. But other days she rested long upon the ground, still as if carved from white jade, ears pricked eerily toward the horizon. That sight at first gave me chills. Something's coming, I thought, but when my eyes followed, seeing nothing, I decided Bayan's eyes were simply growing cloudy. For with the melting of the snows, so I had melted away my memory of Ekin Corlo's visit and her strange words. They were the nonsense of a dream long forgotten, the babble of a child. It was also a blindingly sunny day. Bader and I were warming ourselves on a rock jutting below a hillock, our backs hunched against the wind. I was whistling on a blade of grass cupped between my hands when I saw them coming. Actually, it was the horses that saw them first, for in unison they jerked their heads from the sweet grass poking through the snow patches and stared, ears pricked, nostrils flared into the distance. At their silent alarm, Bader scampered into the tall grasses. I dropped the green blade and scrambled to the hill crest behind me. Just as quickly, I dropped back below the crest, peeking through a wind-whippled thistle bush to watch the strangers approach. Soldiers, nearly 100 mounted soldiers, each carrying a round shield, so that they moved across the steppe as if the great solid walls of the Karakoram marched. They were approaching fast, intent, I guessed, on taking our small ale by surprise. I had to warn the others. Jumping to my feet, I slid and hopped in a rush down the hillside. But the dogs in camp had already spotted the strangers and now joined voices in their own yipping alert. As I limped closer to the cluster of gears, I saw the men of my ale gathering the women and young children and shoving them into the small safety of the felt shelters. My eyes and ears were so full of the noisy confusion, I barely noticed the strong grasp of my father's hand upon my arm. steering me forcefully toward our gear. With a push, I was shoved inside, nearly stumbling over the pile of wailing Shura, clutching her 2 sons onto what little lap her swollen belly allowed. Against Shura's weak cries of protest, I turned and crawled back toward the door flap, pushing it out just long enough to lay an eye against the slit and watched, panting heavily, what was happening. The wind blew stronger and stronger, sending young leaves and bits of grass skittering through our camp. It blasted into the approaching line of soldiers, lifting the flaps of their black dells up and down like so many birds' wings. The riders had appeared so suddenly, in fact, that it seemed almost as if they had dropped in one great flock from the sky. The men and older boys of our ale gathered in a small knot at the farthest gear, bracing themselves against the wind and waiting. In the next instant, the soldiers were upon them, half of the flock settling around the men, spears pointing, holding them helpless. The other half wheeled off toward the horses, waving their arms and shouting wildly. And then my heart swelled in my throat as I began to understand. The soldiers were after our horses. They must be the Khan's soldiers then, for I knew that he could take whatever horses he needed from his people. But in my 12 years, I had never seen soldiers within our own camp. Our herd, already nervous with the sudden arrival of the strange men and their horses, flung their tails into the air and took off. I do not like to admit this, but as I watched these soldiers run after our horses, I admired their skills in the saddle. Each rider and his mount worked as one, leaning into the herd and turning the panicked animals this way and that. Shouting and waving their arms, the riders circled the horses, gradually drawing the invisible noose tighter and smaller until the pack came to a stop, confused. Then, dropping from the sky like a hawk, fell an urga. That's like a pole with a loop around it that can catch horses. The herdsman's long pole with a leather loop at its end around the neck of one quivering horse. Exhausted and scared, the horse, a tall, white-nosed bay belonging to an uncle, was dragged from the herd and hobbled. A dozen soldiers moved alongside it to guard against escape. Time after time, I watched the urga shoot through the air, settling around the neck of another of our horses, and I saw that the soldiers chose only the best. The brief gallop had proven which of our herd were truly the strongest and fastest. Next, the noose fell around the head of my father's old spotted stallion, but a close inspection after pulling him from the herd caused shaking heads and the urga's release. After all, even my father and I knew that the old stallion had not many winters left. But one of the young sorrel males my father had brought back from Karakoram was taken, and she was with a lovely filly not more than 10 days old at her side. One by one, horse by horse, the urga settled over heads until 30 of our finest bred horses stood hobbled apart from the herd. As the first group grew smaller and the new group grew larger, frantic neighs filled the air. And then a horse's familiar scream shot through the clamor, so shrill that my own scream was drowned. For out of the herd had lunged Bayan, the white mare, with the urga tightening around her snowy neck. She tore along magnificently, plunging and bucking, while the rider tried in vain to bring her to a halt. Just as they entered the open steppe, another urga fell around her head. Restrained on both sides, Bayan reared and pawed the air. I had never seen her look so beautiful. Then she ducked her head and lashed out at one rider with both hind feet. Even at that great distance, I saw the men point and laugh approvingly. "Spirit," I heard one shout. I couldn't believe it, any of it. That my lovely white mare was no longer lame, that she, my friend, was being so mistreated, that she was being taken away from me. "No, no, no," I screamed over and over, far out of earshot of the soldiers. I walked in helpless horror as the two riders yanked Bayan toward the smaller herd, while she continued rearing and bucking tirelessly. It took 2 more men to fit hobbles around her front ankles, and when she knocked one onto his seat with a sharp kick, a back leg was tied so snugly to the front pair. I watched through eyes brimming with tears as the soldiers tied more ropes around her, even haltering her to a horse already standing quietly. Bayan finally gave up resisting and stood quivering and nickering fitfully. I saw her looking around, and I knew she was searching for me. I was sobbing now, my shoulders heaving. The scene swam before my tear-filled eyes as if in a terrible dream. Sharp calls were exchanged between the soldiers guarding the men and the ones guarding the horses. Then the first group raised their spears. Swiftly, one after another, with just a threatening point into the chest of a helpless herdsman, new soldiers were added to Khan's army. I saw 3 chosen, 2 uncles and a cousin, who bowed their heads and walked slowly toward their gears. Man, they're just taking people and horses. The commander of the soldiers then dismounted and stomped stiffly from gear to gear, stooping and thrusting his head into each one. When he neared ours, I shrank away from the door flap and sat trembling, trying to stop my crying, and trying to think what I could do to save Bayan. Shirwa was wailing wildly, clutching her 2 sons to her and rocking back and forth in a great jumble of flailing hands and legs. I watched numbly as the terag bubbled out of its pot, spilling into the fire and spending up smelly clouds of steam. No one moved to stop it. A dark head boldly pushed past the flap, bringing with it a deep voice that bellowed, "Soldiers for the Khan's army!" Wide shoulders followed, and soon the large, heavy body of the soldiers' leader swallowed up the remaining space in our gear. He carried in with him on his black uniform the pungent odor of sagebrush, of dung smoke, and leather oil. When he lifted his head to look around, I cringed at the thick, fleshy face with its single black eyebrow digging a track across a bony brow. Ignoring Shura's arms clasped around her 2 sons, the man closed his hairy hand around the small wrist of my older stepbrother. In one sharp motion, the hand pulled the wrist upward so that the boy's body had to follow, though it dangled weakly like a lamb freshly killed for dinner. Here is a soldier, I think, the man snarled. A puny one, but he will do. No, no, screamed Shura, jumping to her feet and spilling her younger son off her lap. She propped her short body beneath her dangling son's limp shoulder. He has a crippled leg, you will see. He can walk no more than a crawl. Thus supporting him, Shura bent over and pushed at her son's leg with one hand as if they were the wooden legs of a toy. Curious, the man released his grips. It was then that I saw Shura pinch her son hard behind the knee. He cried out and limped a painful step forward. See, she said, glancing nervously into the hard face of the commander and pulling her son close to her arms. See, it is my heartbreak to bear, not yours. You do not want a limping soldier. The man merely glared at Shura. His hands reached out and grabbed the boy again. The fleshy face was thrust before the boy's wide eyes. You may limp in the dirt, soldier, but you won't limp in the saddle. Pack your things now. He jerked the boy's wrist to emphasize his point. Then with a cursory glance around the gear, one that swept over my head, the large man turned and left. I heard him shout to his men to prepare to leave. Shura was sobbing again in a helpless heap upon the rug, her 2 sons kneeling, foggy-eyed and unmoving beside her. I released in a rush the sobs I had reined in while the terrifying commander was in our gear. Head pressed upon my knees, I too swayed back and forth, crying out for the lovely white mare that was being taken from me. I saw something glinting through my tears. Wiping a sleeve across my eyes and blinked and bent forward. Lying at my feet on the rug was a small gold likeness of a winged horse with a girl on its back carrying flowers in her hands. Instantly, I remembered the small black amulet in the palm of my grandmother, Ekin Corlo. I reached for the gold figurine, brought it close to my face, and studied the curving form. A loop at the top molded into the design told me it was an adornment for a belt or a horse's harness. And then the strangest thing. Holding that winged pendant in my palm, I felt a great calmness settle over me, like the calm that settles just before a storm, giving you a brief moment to prepare for the fury to follow. You scurry around, gathering up this, pinning down that, never knowing whether you will even be alive in the morning. Clearly then, as I had at Karakoram, I heard the words in my head, now, 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 and I knew what to do. Tightly clutching the gold ornament, I stood, and with the trembling fingers on one hand, quickly fastened and slipped out of my dell. One limping step, and I was at the side of my older stepbrother, hastily unfastening his dark green dell. He, too, was trembling, biting his lip and crying. He said nothing as I slipped the dell from his limp arms and fastened it around my own body. I picked up his orange belt and knotted it around my waist, marking me as a boy. Then I dropped the heavy ornament into an inner pocket. Shura suddenly came alive. No, you can't, she cried. You are just a girl. You're weak, crippled. Wordlessly, but with great assurance, I stepped across her sprawling leg. Shura clawed at my hand and shouted, "They're killers, are you? My own father died in Khan's army, and my first husband. You don't know the danger." But there were so many noises budding in my head that I could not heed Shura. Halting before the cabinet, so she's replaced herself with her brother, right? She's put herself in her stepbrother's place. I held the stuffed doll with one leg dried red. I stared. The doll leered back, taunting. Bad luck, it seemed to whisper through stained lips. Shura's words echoed, "You are just a girl. You're weak, crippled." I took a deep breath, picked up the doll, and cautiously laid it face down. I pulled a knife from the top drawer. Tipping my head to one side, I lifted the knife to my braid, and with a hard, sawing motion, cut it off. Then I tucked the knife within my felt boot. From the wall, I grabbed my father's fur-trimmed felt hat and put it down over my head, nearly hiding my face. I reached under the bed and pulled out Ekin Corlo's dust-covered leather pouch, slinging it across my shoulder. I dipped water into the spare pouch and strapped it around my shoulder as well, then stuffed a handful of dried mutton strips into my dell. Lifting my saddle in my arms, I stumbled under all the weight toward the door flap. Bader was suddenly at my feet, rubbing his body around my legs, eager to follow. He usually trotted out a bit with me when I left on a ride. "Not this time, Bader," I said, wishing I had a free hand to give him a final pat. "Better you stay inside." He meowed. I didn't look back. Already the other new soldiers, all relatives of mine, were saddling their horses. Everywhere women were wailing. Not daring to glance to where my father stood, I carried my saddle straight toward the white mare. As I passed beneath the glare of the heavy-browed commander, he noted my limp and grunted, satisfied. With my heart thumping, I lifted my saddle onto Bayan, the horse I had never ridden. But there was that look in her eye again, the same twinkling, promising adventure which I had trusted at Karakoram, and I knew now I was meant to ride her. With the bridle fitted upon her head and the girth tightened around her stomach, I quickly unknotted the hobbles and ropes. Then I stepped into the stirrup, swung my crippled leg over, and sat lightly upon her back. When the soldiers moved to release the hobbles from the horses they were stealing, I was already hidden among the other soldiers riding east. The morning wind blew straight into our faces, chilling our skin with its cold breath. Yet, tucking my face beneath collar and hat, I smiled, for seated upon Bayan's back, I felt as if I had wings. With a long groan, the white mare plunged to her knees. Like a moonlit wave crashing upon the shore, her belly and hips followed, the thin spray of her tail falling silently at the finish. Her whiteness pooled in the darkness. "Grandmother," exclaimed the girl, bolting upright. The old woman reached out to stroke the girl's hair. Her words were filled with soothing. "All is well," she crooned. "All is well. The time grows near. Here," she said, reaching her hands behind her head. So grandmother's back in real time, right, with her granddaughter and their mare, the horse that's having a baby. "Tie this around her neck." In the girl's palm, she placed the pale green pendant carved in the shape of a galloping horse. "It is Jade, so that her flanks may loosen and the filly gallop from her as easy as the spring breeze." Making her way to the mare's side, the girl carefully fastened the pendant's leather thong so that the galloping horse dangled, twirling just below the white throat. Then she looked at her grandmother. "Why did you say filly?" The old woman shook her head slightly, nudging the question aside. "Come," she said, motioning with her hands. "There is more to tell." Reluctant to leave the mare's side, the girl stroked the white mane. "Does it hurt her?" she asked. Silence answered her words for many moments. "I think," said the old woman, sighing, "she holds within her too much joy to feel pain. Now, come." When the girl was huddled once again within the thick robes, still warm with the heat of their bodies, the mare lifted her head in their direction. She seemed to be calmly waiting for the story to continue. Relieved, the girl nestled deeper within the warmth and thought about what her grandmother had been telling her. "Weren't you scared to ride off with all the soldiers?" she asked. "Yes." "Where did they take you? Where did you sleep? What did you eat?" A chuckle rattled the old woman, but her granddaughter wasn't finished. "Did you ever see Bader again? And what about Bayan? Was her leg healed? Did you have to fight anymore? Anyone?" Quiet laughter overtook the woman. "As Tengri sees all, granddaughter, you chatter like the starlings. Now, which do I answer first?" "Did the soldiers find out you were a girl?" That is the ends of chapter 10 and chapter 11. I'd like you to tell me how Oyen's life changes. This is a big chapter here. How does her life change here in chapter 11? What does she do here that changes everything? If you could answer that question in a comment, complete sentences, that would be great.